Is your 2019 off to a great start? Is the economy booming for you and your family? Hi, I'm Jordan Worma, and I'm not running for any office, but that's not important. All that matters is that you don't vote for the other party, whatever that party is, because whatever greatness means to you, it's obviously up to your party alone to make it happen. Whatever you do, don't get up and get involved personally. I'm Jordan Worma, and I don't approve this message. I am pretty jazzed about today's guest. My little town of East Hampton had a couple of really tight races in the past November 2018 midterm election cycle, and I realized that while Connecticut is generally seen nationally as a very blue state, when you really get down to local levels, it's far more purple than anyone outside the state really ever seems to recognize. So while Theresa Govert didn't win her race to be in the state house rep for District 34, she was a first-time candidate, and she learned a lot about the process and how taking a creative approach to campaigning helps candidates of all parties. So Theresa spoke with me about her campaign, the future of political campaigning, and how thinking outside the box can help younger candidates reach wider audiences and to engage with potential voters. Yes, politics can be a creative endeavor. So voting matters, and no vote makes more difference than your vote of confidence in the future of Table to Stage. I hope you'll head over to the polls at iTunes and cast a 5-star vote for the pod, and don't forget to participate in the exit survey by leaving a glowing review on your way out. If you'd like to contribute to the issues that matter most, then you can head over to patreon.com and make your contribution to promoting creativity and the arts by becoming a table leg or a stagehand for as little as $1 a month. Whatever your political affiliation, I hope that you will take a listen to Theresa and give some thought to the ways young candidates, minority candidates, and the increase of women in politics can impact all of us for the better. So without further delay, here's former and hopefully future Democratic candidate for Connecticut's 34th District, Theresa Govert. All right, so are you originally from Connecticut, or are you from somewhere else?
So I have an interesting background. So I was actually born in Nairobi, Kenya, because my parents.
Oh,
yes.
You're the one that was born in Kenya. Okay,
I know.
It's been you all along.
I know. I was like, but my great grandparents are from Colchester, so okay. We have deep roots in the area, and we moved back right before my 9th birthday. So. Okay. From the area, but with kind of a really interesting...
By way of an ocean.
By way of an ocean and a continent, yeah.
Yeah, wow. So, do you remember anything from growing up there?
I do. I think...
Pretty much the same as it is here?
Yeah, I joke about having the same childhood memories as everyone, but just with a different background, kind of. So sure. The green screen has a much different background than...
Okay. Yeah. So your whole background, your childhood is all CGI. You don't remember anything. Okay.
It's all, yeah.
Just little white plastic balls all over the place to track your movement.
Right.
All right.
And I'm moving. Yeah.
So when you came to the States, to Colchester, did you do all your education, high school, all that stuff, all through Colchester?
So I was actually in East Haddam. So my mom's family is originally from Colchester, but we decided to move to East Haddam for the school system. So went through middle school and high school in East Haddam, and then went to the University of Connecticut. Okay. So
what'd you study there?
Psychology.
Beer pong like everybody else?
Psychology and women, gender, and sexuality studies.
Oh boy. Okay. A little bit of light reading, I'm sure.
Yeah. Just the, and my interest has always kind of been political, but I think understanding humans is really important. And that was what drew me to psychology, and then women, gender, and sexuality studies is really similar to sociology, and so just kind of understanding how the world works through that lens.
Was there any particular area within your study that really stood out to you as something that you wanted to focus a lot of attention on?
I think in the beginning, a lot of my focus was around gender-based violence and violence against women, and how the prevalence of that within the United States, within college campuses, and then more globally also. So that was my original focus.
Have you been, well, I'm sure this has had an impact, but because of your educational background, the Me Too movement and all this stuff that's happened over the last couple of years, what's your thought on how kind of the image of that violent culture, or that, even if violence isn't the right word, the sort of misogynistic, I guess, culture shift is happening?
I think the Me Too movement's really powerful, because the conversations that I started trying to have with people 10 years ago, it felt like brand new conversations, and now it's kind of part of the general discourse of our everyday lives, and there's more just a heightened awareness about the issues, so it feels easier to have more meaningful conversations, because you're not starting from zero, you're starting from a little bit more.
We're just kind of having that out there as sort of a free topic to discuss now. Kind of, it has to allow people to have a shifting perspective of, if not their own behavior, then of the behavior they have seen from people that have been close to them.
Yeah, and I think that's hard, is contending with the ways that we are part of a culture that has allowed that to happen, and ways we've contributed or negatively been impacted by it. So,
Wow. All right, so you were ahead of the curve studying that then at UConn.
I was like, wow, who knew there might be money to be made?
Somebody did. They were printing those #MeToo t-shirts pretty quickly. So when did your first interest in politics start to develop? Were you younger, or was this like college age that you started to have this kind of thing pop up?
I've always been interested in politics. So my dad was a selectman in East Haddam, so kind of always been part of the process, and like a child who's seen and been brought along through a lot of campaigns, and I think it's always grown from there. There's a woman who actually lives just down the street from me who was joking about when I was 13, she was on the Board of Education, and I was babysitting, and I'd babysit for free because it was part of my civic duty.
Can you talk to my babysitters about
when you go to Board of Ed meetings, I will babysit for free. I was like, what type of 13-year-old was I? But I think my parents, that was kind of the ethos of the house that I grew up in, was that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Did you get to go to the polls for elections and see that process when you were younger too? Yeah.
And actually, one of my most vivid memories is the first time my dad won selectman. I think he won by 6 or 7 votes. And it was really close. And he had tears in his eyes, and he was kind of comparing it to the political or democratic process in Kenya, and how that what the difference between what that would have looked like and what this looked like. And that was kind of really profound, and shaped a lot about how much I respect the democratic process in the United States, even though it does have a lot of room for growth.
Well, so that brings up something that I think is worth talking about, like, because your father served in government in Connecticut, in what is commonly held up as the greatest democracy in the history of humanity, after having spent some time in Kenya and seeing that political arena. So what was instilled in you as something that really stands out in the American process that maybe wasn't present there, or just the differences between the two?
So I don't want to do a disservice to the Kenyan electoral process, but I just think there was a time where it was rife with corruption, and just a lot of trends that we talk about in the United States in regards to voter suppression, and so, but a little bit more extreme's not the right word, but more obvious potentially of the voter suppression that was happening, where right now we're removing people from voter rolls because their signatures don't match. And I'm like, I don't think I could do my signature like 3 times in a row on the same piece of paper and have it match. Right. So, but then, and I think in that time in the Kenyan political okay. Oh, that is me. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Someone forgot to turn her phone off.
I know. I was like, I thought I turned it. But just, I think also there is a general trust in our political process. But I do think that's shifted over, I think, the past 10 years from when.
You think that the trust of the American people in the electoral process here has eroded?
I think so, to a certain extent. And I think I think both sides feel to different degrees that when somebody else wins, it's because there was some type of meddling going on.
How do we fix that? Let's correct the issue today.
Right.
So tell me how to fix it, and I'll send an email to somebody, and we'll take care of it.
Like, how do we rebuild American trust in? I think it goes to a deeper distrust of government right now, like throughout the American population, and that I think we see reflected in a lot of things. If just we're not going to let government potentially socialize our healthcare system, even though all of the research, including from the Koch brothers, says that more people will get health coverage and it will be cheaper because there's a distrust about, I trust an insurance company more, which doesn't make sense to me, but like, I'd rather hand my money over to an insurance company to handle my healthcare than hand part of my paycheck over to the government to handle my healthcare.
Well, I think just that word tax scares people sometimes. Which is unfortunate. To me anyway. Yeah,
and a part of it is there's a great quote that taxes are the price we pay for civilization. Yeah. So kind of remembering the fact that we have roads, and I'm always kind of because I live in East Haddam, and there's no stoplights around here. Whenever I go to a place where there are stoplights, I'm like, wow, these all work, and they like, all of us just take for granted that our traffic will move freely. Right. And it's just like this magic that happens, and it removes stress from our lives. And that's because of the taxes we pay.
Right. Everybody notices the pothole that doesn't get filled.
Right.
But not the traffic light that the pothole is at.
Right. Yeah.
So you were interested in politics very early, and you experienced it firsthand with, your father being an elected official. How did you eventually come to decide that it was time to throw your own hat in the ring and get involved as a candidate of your own?
I think so. After the 2016 election, I don't know
something
if you
happened
know this
then?
about me. Yeah, 2016.
2016, what happened?
So I was in the Peace Corps, so I actually missed most of the primaries, and then a lot of, I think, I was removed from the heightened emotions. So you were in the Peace
Corps in 2016.
Yeah.
That is the perfect time to have been doing that.
Yeah, and so I came back in August of 2016, and so I missed a lot of the super emotional.
You got back just as things were heating up to the boiling point.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
So I think out of that ignorance, on the day after the election, I was just searching for something to do. So I painted this big 4x8 sign that I put up in town that said, "Dear Muslims, immigrants, women, LGBT folks, people of color, we love you proudly and boldly. We will endure." Wow. And that was immediately defaced that night with Trump 2020. God. And then, so out of that, we painted it over white, and we put up a invitation to a community conversation so people could come and talk about what the election reflected to them. Yeah. And so there's almost 300 people that attended that conversation.
Just from your town?
Our town, from East Hampton, the surrounding areas.
Okay.
And
that's not an insignificant
right
part of the population. It's a small, small towns here.
Yeah.
That's what, 5 to 8% probably of the whole population. That's a good chunk of people. Yeah.
But I think because I had done that and then organized the conversation, I started leading a lot of kind of more grassroots political action.
Yeah.
And so people were viewing me as this grassroots activist who'd kind of connected with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And when we were looking for a candidate, everyone kept asking me. I was like, okay.
So your hat was thrown into the ring on your behalf.
Yes, on my behalf.
Okay. A little bit of white paint and some cardboard, and all of a sudden you're a candidate for office.
Right. It's like, I should just have a sign, like a sticker that says official sign page. Yeah, so... and then there wasn't really anyone else that emerged as a candidate. Yeah. So there was a convention and somebody else who was interested, but ultimately it was kind of clear that I was the person that was going to activate people. And I think the other thing that we learned from 2016 that we know from research, but 2016 really demonstrated it, is that we're emotional beings and we vote with our yeah. You didn't
Weird.
know. We don't vote with our rational minds. We vote with like our emotional bodies. And so I think a lot of moving forward was, how do we find people who will be able to talk about policy but connect it to that emotional part inside of us that helps us.
So in case it's not obvious to everybody who doesn't necessarily know who you are, you ran as a Democrat.
Yeah, that is true.
Were you approached by the Democratic Party to be their candidate, or were you put forward by members of your community as a Democratic candidate?
So I was on the Democratic Town Committee. I think I joined in 2016. And we actually saw a lot of people. I'm 27 also, if that's an interesting fact.
Okay. I didn't know how old you were.
Yeah.
And I was raised in that generation. You don't ask how old a woman is.
But you and I were talking about this earlier, but I think one of the things our local Democratic Town Committee saw was people in their late 20s and early 30s join the Democratic Town Committee after the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And so during that, as part of the committee, they're kind of trying to figure out how you're going to fill out a slate. And I think multiple people had asked me, and that was just, yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never really been sure how people find their way onto a ticket.
No, it is a good question. Even on reflection, I'm like, what happened 8 months ago or 9, however long ago it was that.
Yeah, I mean, you were part of. I mean, I know it was compared a lot to the Year of the Woman, which was after the Anita Hill hearings with Clarence Thomas, where the 2018 election cycle had more women on tickets, more minorities on tickets than we've ever seen before. And it was a really incredible shift and a very rapid one. And I think, I'm not particularly well versed in this stuff. I try to keep up with the news and try to stay an informed voter, but I'm not part of the political system.
Right.
So it seems to me that, and I hate saying this because I feel like it makes me sound like this really old person, and I guess I kind of am, because I'm Generation X, and there's all this people like to bash Generation Y or millennials or whatever's coming. I have no idea.
The I generations.
Is that what it is? Okay.
Or Generation Z.
Right. Yeah. Or as I kind of like to think of it, the people that are going to be in charge of my healthcare when I need it the most.
Yeah. No, that's a great way to think about it. Yeah.
And you're part of that generation now that is leading this movement to have more appropriate representation of who this country is actually built from. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's an accurate thing to say, right? I mean, the country is getting less and less white. I don't want to say less and less male because it's 50-50 no matter what, but leadership positions and people in powerful places are not always going to be gray-haired white men anymore. So being part of that election cycle that had such wonderful representation from all these different groups, how do you feel that impacted you as a candidate and your candidacy overall? I mean, obviously, unfortunately, you didn't win the election. It was very, very close. But it was still a woman took that seat. Yeah. Which was held by a woman before that.
Yeah, no, there was the first newspaper that came out with the woman who held the seat previously was Melissa Gebron. And it was a photo of Melissa and then myself and then the woman who ran against me, Irene. And I took Irene Hayes, yeah. And I took a photo of it and I was just celebrating the fact that like this is what our election looked like. Yeah. And we haven't seen that before.
Yeah. Between, I mean, Hillary Clinton being whatever people's thoughts on that are being put forward as the main candidate by a major party was a big deal. Yeah. I mean, it's the first woman since Geraldine Ferrara.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think so. Yeah. That was on a major party ticket. Yeah.
And that was in the 80s.
Right.
I mean,
I know.
But so we've gone from what, the 88 election cycle to the 2008 election cycle before there was another woman on the major party ticket, right? And she lost the primary. So, and now just in the few years since then, there's this huge change in the way, especially the Democrat. I'm just going to only the Democratic Party because you can't look at the Republican Party as anything other than white men right now. Unfortunately.
And I just read a really interesting article today about the Democratic Party has spent a lot of time kind of cultivating women as candidates or non-traditional candidates. And the article was looking for the Republican equivalent of that. Yeah. And why in the year of the woman did we not see as many Republican women? And part of that was there hasn't been systems to kind of cultivate those candidates.
Yeah. Well, they just had the 2019 congressional class photos released recently, and you can see just in those photographs, like it
looks very different. Yeah,
they're very different. But I mean, there's this huge shift in a short period of time. Excuse me. What caused that shift? Like in 2016, an alarm must have gone off within the Democratic Party. So we have to change things. We have to do better. Do you know what those lessons are and how they were implemented?
I think the conversation is, part of it is we've had baby boomers as one of our largest voting blocks. Yeah. But millennials are on baby boomers' heels as just population size wise, one of the largest voting blocks. And I think as a millennial, my generation, one of the things that we see is that it's just like LGBT rights. It's just part of, it's not something that kind of phases us. And it's just part of the fabric of who we are. And we know that the people who are having children are more likely to have the last name Rodriguez than the last name Smith. And so there's just kind of this understanding of...
Or Smith Rodriguez.
Yeah, exactly. So this understanding of the diversity of our nation, I think there's just more awareness. And I think a lot of that has been... We'll have conversations about how Facebook has kind of brought us into our little bubbles. But I do think, as someone who grew up in a very, very white part of Connecticut, I think one of the benefits of Facebook and the internet is just we've been able to be exposed to a lot more people who live 40 miles away from us, but because of the way we've lived our lives previously, they weren't part of our consciousness. And now we're like, oh, wow, we're really intrinsically linked and we have to understand that. And we can watch police brutality happen in real time and kind of understand what's going on there and have conversations about what that looks like. And And then I think there's a lot of distrust of identity politics, but I think the conversation just needs to be, instead of what is identity politics, what is the strength in diversity? And we know that for anything that like a monolith and very homogeneous population doesn't create, like isn't creative and doesn't produce new in nature. If you have
nature rewards diversity,
exactly. And so, and I think we understand that a field that only grows wheat for 100 years will just be drained of all nutrients, and we don't see that. And so our political system rewards diversity, that the people's experiences are just as important, and their lived experiences of what it means to be a woman and potentially have gone through a sexual assault, and how that will inform how you legislate. Or someone who, like Johanna Hayes, grew up with this like a very a challenging background, and how that will inform how she legislates. And
for people who don't know who she is, she's from Waterbury, right? She's the first African-American woman state representative.
So she's a congresswoman.
Oh, she is congresswoman. Yeah. Okay.
So the first black congresswoman from the state of Connecticut.
Okay, which to me is mind-boggling. Like, and we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but Connecticut is seen as this sort of elite, liberal kind of island up in the Northeast. But the state doesn't really play that way politically, does it? I mean, yes, all of our federal representatives are Democrats. We have a Democratic governor now, and the incoming governor is Democrat, but we didn't for a long time. Connecticut plays much more along like a purple balance than it does either red or blue. So how does that happen? Why is the state government so much different than it appears on a federal level?
Yeah. And we saw that reflected in kind of where money was spent from the outside. So large outside Republican dark money PACs spent almost $1 million in very local legislative races, because they knew that Connecticut was so purple that it could have flipped red really easily. And that would have been kind of the cherry on top if they were able to grab Connecticut.
Yeah.
And I think it's something like 28 legislatures across this country are controlled by Republicans. Or there's the trifecta, so the governorship and both houses are controlled by Republicans.
Right.
And this year we had a blue wave in the state of Connecticut, but a lot of us kind of held this bated breath of our Senate was tied 18-18.
Yeah.
The House of Representatives was really close, and the governorship, Governor Malloy is less popular than Donald Trump.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah. And part of it's just, I think we've lost the messaging game of people feel like Democrats are either, and there's a lot of racial undertones of they're either people in inner cities, or they're kind of these hyper elite, educated, intellectuals without any real life experience who do middle management jobs. And so I think we lost a lot of our messaging. And Connecticut is as purple as, thankfully we're a little bit bluer now, but we're as purple as purple could be.
Yeah, it was really shocking when I looked at the electoral map and I saw how many red districts there were and how many blue districts there were. And I know in some states, like Pennsylvania and Ohio, where gerrymandering is like a big thing, and the Democratic candidates get thousands more votes than the Republicans, but the Republicans get the seats because the districts are set up in such a way. And Connecticut doesn't,
around households.
Yeah, it's crazy. Connecticut doesn't have that issue.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure it has a little bit of it, but it's certainly not to the degree of some of these other states that have this big problem. So it's a curiosity to me that we end up with the state government that is so split down the middle, for the most part. And yet, when we send our federal representatives, it's almost universally a Democrat. I'm not complaining about that personally. Right. I just find it interesting that there's that dichotomy within the state.
And I think, I'm trying to remember what the statistic is, but it's something, Connecticut residents are some of the most comfortable residents of kind of voting across party lines. So we'll find that a lot of voters just vote their traditional party line. But in Connecticut, there's a lot of voters who will kind of pick and choose from both pools.
Do you think that has something to do with education level in the state? Because I know Connecticut residents tend to have higher than national average education and higher than national average income. So are those factors for something like that?
I don't know. One of the factors that potentially could play into it is that it's expensive to run a state rep campaign. Or for the state senate. And so one of the things Connecticut has done is we're one of the leaders in public financing. Okay. So each person, if you can demonstrate that you have support. So for a state rep campaign, you need to be able to raise $5,000 from 150 people within your district to demonstrate that you have some type of support system and you're not just Joe Schmo of the... Well,
those seem like very achievable goals.
Yeah, they're very achievable goals. And then you get $32,000 in public financing to run your campaign. And the state senate has similar things. So what we've seen...
I'm chuckling a little bit because the number you just threw out is higher than the salary.
I know. It's actually absurd because if you think about the fact that both candidates get $32,000,
but only one of them's going to get paid.
One of them's going to get paid $28,000 for your actual salary. Yeah, and that's but one of the things we've seen is I think in a place that is traditionally kind of one party has a stronghold, it's harder to fundraise. But the fact that there is public financing in the state of Connecticut meant that places that traditionally would have had a harder time running potentially a Republican challenging a Democrat. We're like, wait a minute, it's a lot, this is more achievable now. So we're going to put somebody up. And so while Democrats tend to be, or we do champion public financing, and I believe that all of our campaigns from the federal level down should have public financing.
Yeah, I do too. Campaign finance reform has to be to be at the top
one
of
the
list.
number one things. And the thing is that it's made more competitive races and Democrats potentially lost races because of public financing while at the same time championing it. But that's good for all of us because then hopefully you're kind of getting better candidates out of the process and not just people who have lots of connections to wealthy donors.
Right. Yeah, I mean, having actual working class people being able to represent actual working class people would be a nice thing to throw in there once in a while.
And the challenge in Connecticut is that the jobs, you get public financing, but the jobs don't pay them that well themselves.
Right. So you have to have some sort of...
Yeah. And so it makes it so
that's so tough.
Yeah. And so what we see is a lot of people who are retired running. And so the average age of a state legislature, someone who's representing us, I think is 57 years old in the state of Connecticut.
Okay. Well, that's lower than I thought it would be.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's different than what the population is necessarily.
Yeah. And certainly.
If everyone's 57, their long-term vision of the state of Connecticut is different than somebody who's 27 who's looking to legislate.
Well, I mean, just somebody my age, their mid-40s, is going to have a very different view of things than someone coming from your age group in their mid to late 20s.
Right.
It doesn't take that many years to kind of shift, especially in this age where technology is moving so quickly.
Fast.
You've got people that have been serving at the federal level in Congress for 30 years who don't know how to use email even.
Right, yeah.
And, how you're supposed to be representing average people when you're not living, and you haven't in 30 years, haven't lived an average person's life. It's mind-boggling to me that's a selling point.
It's this fine balance of we want people with expertise, but we also want people who have everyday experiences and can understand how in their everyday lives policy.
When I was a kid, there was a commercial on TV. I don't remember what it was for, but it was a guy looking for a job. And he's like, how to get a job without experience, but how do I get an experience without a job?
I think, yeah.
All right. So obviously 2016 didn't go the way the Democratic Party wanted it to go. And argument could be made that it didn't go the way the Republican Party wanted it to go either.
Right.
And they have sort of shifted to align themselves a little bit better following that. But it seems like both parties now, as far apart as they are more or less in lockstep along their own track. I mean, it seems to be that the messaging has gotten better, more consistent, and for both sides.
Yeah.
But as far as changing campaign strategies, how we go about choosing candidates, identifying people that are, quote, electable.
Yeah.
Which was a term I think that had to get thrown out at some point because it used to be that certain people that are currently sitting in very high offices were considered unelectable.
Because there was a point where we never could have imagined that someone who's divorced and remarried could be electable, or someone who's gay could be electable, or
So, but in redefining what makes a good candidate and how the campaigns are run, what sort of ways, especially for you as a first-time candidate, how did you incorporate new ideas or out-of-the-box thinking or being able to reach new audience, especially younger audiences who haven't voted before, and energizing them to get them up off the couch and to the voting booth? Or maybe the bigger challenge is getting older people who have been voting a certain way for so long and they're so used to it to consider new candidates, new ideas. How did you go about that? And how, like, maybe you can't speak to the party as a whole, but in Connecticut, like, what was done? Because, I mean, Connecticut's got some great new representation.
Yeah.
You got the youngest state rep ever in Will Haskell.
Yeah.
You've got just really, there's a shift in who's representing at the state level. How was that achieved?
So out of the 2016 election, we saw, again, all of this grassroots activism. And I think people didn't know how to contend with it at the national scale. It was like we had the Women's March and one of the largest.
That was impressive.
And so that same type of energy came to campaigns. And I think what Democrats did across the state of Connecticut and what we did in my own race was politics is personal, and people really felt that into their hearts. And they said, I'm going to spend my free time now working to get the people I truly believe in elected. And so that meant, I think for most campaigns, a lot of door knocking.
Yeah.
Of just like, that meant every weekend you were out in the district knocking on doors. And even the Republicans, kind of in their post-mortem discussions and what I've read, have been like, the Democrats out-strategized us in the fact that we'd go to a door in August or in October and knock for the first time, and the person there would say, the Democrats have been here 3 times already.
Oh, wow.
Like that type of energy. And
I know that's how I met you. You knocked on my door.
Exactly.
About a week after your opponent, actually.
Yeah.
And I was impressed by, and for you, but also for Irene Hayes, who knocked on my door as well, just the willingness to engage with people, because it's never happened to me before. I've never had a candidate knock on my door. I've had campaign volunteers in the past, but I've never seen a candidate do that before. So is that one of the things that was identified as a need?
Yeah. And so strategy-wise, I think the conversation we had was that it's something like, for every 7 doors you knock, you might get a new vote. For every 333 pieces of mail, which has really been a traditional way that people reach, you get a new vote. So it was like, well, the evidence is very clear that knocking on doors and having real conversations with people and meeting them where they are in their homes is the way to build a relationship and build trust and either earn votes or kind of have hard conversations where you're both left reflecting on different truths about the political process.
Yeah. Now, what did you learn specifically in actually having people answer their doors and having to answer in real time questions from people who didn't know you were coming, first of all?
Yeah.
Didn't know who you were, second of all.
Yeah, I started in April, so people are like, who are you? For what?
Yeah,
Why
right.
are you here? Yeah.
So what did you learn about that? Like, was it surprising? Were people engaging with you or people dismissive? What was the takeaway from that?
I think so. One of the first, as this is a redder district, one of the first things I learned was that if I led with, "Hi, I'm Theresa, I'm a Democrat," that like shut down people immediately. And they're like, "You can get out of here." And I was like, "Okay, I'm sorry." And so what I learned quickly out of that was, "Hi, I'm Theresa, I'm running for state rep, and I'm here as your neighbor to talk to you about what's going on in your life."
Yeah.
And just really hearing about what people's concerns were. And a lot of it was the immediate things like the house next door is blighted or there's a pothole on my street, which is not necessarily something a state rep could do, but it's something that people felt like their everyday life was impacted by, to like, I lost my job because of a healthcare, because of I had cancer or and so a lot of one of the things I found the most surprising was how personal people would get with a basic, like a stranger on their door, and I'd hear their life stories. And I think you shared about about your situation with healthcare too. And it was just like, immediately I was like, wow, we're humans meeting each other. And in the age of social media, we're so far away from that.
Yeah. Well, I think the willingness to share a personal story, at least, for me anyway, is somebody that potentially might actually be able to do something about it, kind of makes it an immediate thing that you can address. Like, and even if the story that I tell through you gets to other people and influences a vote for somebody else, then it's worth sharing. Other than healthcare, was there anything else that you heard from people regularly? Like, here's the issue that's most important to me, and where do you stand on it? Yeah,
so healthcare was a huge issue, and then people felt overtaxed, and so and talking about taxation as a burden, and I can empathize with that because in the state of Connecticut we do have a really regressive system of taxation. So the more money you make, the less you pay percentage-wise. And so people who can really feel like, when I pay my taxes, I can't pay a car bill or I can't get braces for my kids. Those people, I was like, I understand you. I'm with you. I don't make that much money either. Versus once you're making more money and it's like, well, maybe you're not going to be able to buy a boat or go on a vacation. It's a much different, and you're paying less percentage wise in taxes. So the fact that people do feel, because we just have a really upside down system of taxation. And so I think one of the problems Democrats have had in general is we've been like, oh, well, it's not that, like, don't you know that taxes do all these things, instead of like really emphasizing really empathizing with people about why taxes feel so hard. And it's like, a lot of people don't make a living wage, and then on top of that you're paying,
that's unbelievable,
and then you're paying property taxes on your cars and on your homes, and instead of and you're paying student loans or taking out a second mortgage to send your kid to school, and really worried about your healthcare costs going up. And it all feels so immediate. And we have a lot of economic anxiety in Connecticut and across the United States.
Was there ever, I hope the answer is yes, lots of times, but was there ever a time you walked away from a door thinking, you know what, I just changed that vote from the other party to my own party. Did that ever happen, or was it more this person wasn't going to vote and now they are?
There is a lot of that. I think in the state of Connecticut, there was a lot of Democrats who were angry about what was going on at the national level, but didn't realize that Connecticut was so purple and could have flipped totally red. So the conversation was, if you believe in checks and balances, and we don't see checks and balances at the national level right now, we need Connecticut to be a check to what's ever going on. Yeah. So I think that was people like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And I didn't realize the Senate was tied 18-18. And then on election day, one of the things I was the most proud about was I had a lot of people come up to me who were Republicans, and they said, I voted straight Republican and I dropped down for you. Cause
oh, wow.
Yeah, it was like, I tear up thinking about it. 'Cause it was just, but that trust that, and I am radically honest. If people ask me a question, I will tell you exactly kind of where I stand on that policy issues and what my core values are. So the fact that I didn't compromise any of those values in conversations, but earned people's trust.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, it was
I don't know how many, like realistically, how many people are willing to even consider voting that way these days from either party. Like,
there was a lot of people I was like, I'm scared to talk to them, to ask them to vote for me because I know they're from the other party, and then somehow through conversation they'd be like, no, you've earned my trust either throughout your lifetime because of what you've done, or because, and I'm like, wow, I didn't want to ask you to vote for me, but thank you for sharing that.
Was that a hard hurdle to get over, like asking somebody to vote for you the first time?
Yeah
I would imagine, because it's like I have a hard time, like, can I borrow a quarter, like Okay, so how many volunteers did you have working with you, like knocking on doors and putting signs up? And
I would say I had a great group of volunteers. I think I had a core group of about 30 volunteers, and then maybe 100. I'm thinking about the thank you notes I have to write right now. I was like, I just counted this number. The thank you notes I had to write was like 100 and something, and that does not include people who donated. So that's just people who either hosted parties at their homes to introduce me to their neighbors, or knocked on doors, or drove around.
I didn't realize that was even an option. You can host a party like that. Oh, that's cool.
I know. That's next. If I
lots of free shrimp and drinks, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna gain 30 pounds from eating cheese, but and that was a fun way to just engage with people. Like people would invite all of their neighbors to come and have a conversation and ask lots of questions.
Yeah. How many of those did you do?
I think I ended up doing about 15 of those.
Wow.
Well, Will Haskell, who is the 22-year-old who won
that still
down on the
blows
Gold
me away
Coast.
that he did that.
He did like 198 or something.
Parties?
Yes.
He's 22.
Right. He has nothing else going on, but it was amazing. Right. But I think that's part of why he did so well, was because, and once you've met someone inside your neighbor's house, it's,
Wow. So I know the area of the state that we both live in. I mean, we're different towns, but the same district. Is more traditionally red-ish. It's on the reddish side of purple.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, in the primary season, voted for Bernie. Over the Republican candidates and over Hillary Clinton. So clearly there's a chord that can be struck in an area like this to swing votes one way or the other. Do you feel like going to the next election cycle that chord will be identifiable? And what do you think the future holds for you as a candidate and for this district, as far as, the way we might be able to move the needle one way or the other in Connecticut?
Yeah. And so I think what Bernie Sanders, his message was as an outsider. And I think that resonated with a lot of people who were just kind of tired of the same old politicians and kind of the same old talking points, and like, I'll cut taxes and build jobs, and just the same thing you hear all the time. And he was saying those things, but in a way that felt really real and reflected what people were feeling about the way wealth is concentrated in this country. It was like, I know something's not right here because my partner and I work full time and we can't make it with. And so what's going on? Because my grandfather's generation, and he grew up in Colchester, he had a high school degree and worked at Pratt & Whitney and had one job that provided for a family of 5 with good health care and pension. And so I think, and I do think that's what Donald Trump tapped into, was that longing for the past of that Make America Great Again. And that again was of my parents' generation, or my grandparents' generation, but for other people, my parents' generation.
You calling me old?
Not you. I'm just the general electorate. Where you could have that type of lifestyle, and it also tapped into kind of some of the really ugly parts of our history. But I think, both of those messages tapped into was that what's going on doesn't work for the average person.
The status quo had to change.
The status quo had to change, and so we have to continue to have those conversations. How does society break down and not work when wealth is so hyper concentrated? And the fact that pensions are a thing of yesteryear. If there's a job with a pension, let us know.
I mean, pensions for my grandparents, supported the next generation. And now if you get 20% of what you earned after 20 or 30 years somewhere, wow, is that a windfall?
Right. Yeah, I was going to say that.
And most people aren't going to be getting any sort of pension at all with current employment regulations as they are. So it's really scary to look ahead. I don't know that I'll be able to fully retire ever.
And I think that's the economic anxiety that we all feel. And I think that's the messaging that Democrats have to be better about, of that economic anxiety you feel doesn't have to exist. In Sweden, people aren't worried about losing their homes over a health scare. Or worried about whether or not they'll be able to pay bills if somebody has to take maternity leave for 2 weeks. We have created a system through our government to help take away some of that anxiety. But and the retirement crisis is real.
And that's just me. My kids, unless something changes dramatically, they will never retire. And there won't be a support system in place, at least a government-controlled system in place, unless something changes now. Right. So, oh boy.
And I think we Americans love Social Security, and it's a system that works really well, and we can have Medicare for everyone. That's also another system that works really well, and we have to have conversations about why do we give some of the best healthcare in this country to people once they're 60. It's if we gave people great healthcare when they were 17, it might stop a lot of this stuff that we're paying for when you're 60 or 27, where I'm all of my friends were over the other day, and we're because of Obamacare, we were able to stay on our parents' healthcare until we were 26. We were all joking that we went to the doctors on our 25th birthday. It was we have one more year of healthcare.
We can get all this done
everything. Anything you foresee that could be expensive in the next 10 years, do it right now.
Oh boy.
But that, it shouldn't be the conversations we're having around.
All right. So since this show is predominantly about creativity, I'm going to ask you to get really creative right now.
Okay.
And I want to know how to engage with people on the other side on issues. Is there a way to do that? Because I honestly haven't found one, and I have lost people from my life over things like this, which is sad, but at some point racism is that's the end.
I know.
So
and that's the very how do you honor where other people are while also making a very saying racism and misogyny is not, or homophobia are not acceptable.
Those are non-starters, and we're done. But there's got to be a way to engage in meaningful, productive conversation with people who don't have the same politics as you. It wasn't that long ago where you could have those conversations with people, and now for both of the major parties and for the independent party or the libertarians, whoever, it's all very us versus them. And I remember the first time I became conscious of this was probably late 80s, early 90s. I accidentally heard a Rush Limbaugh radio show. And he was saying, he was using that language, it's us versus them, that long ago. But now it's really to that level where everyone sees their neighbor as an adversary, and no one's able to engage in anything beyond, weather sure is nice today.
Right. And not have and I think that's we've lost our ability to have kind of conversations about civics, and I think part of it is our realities can be very different. Of the term Black Lives Matters means something radically different to me than someone who's listening to Rush Limbaugh and has only engaged with the term Black Lives Matters through the Rush Limbaugh lens. And like ignorance, and it's kind of confusing because we have so much access to information these days. It's like, is ignorance a choice at this point? But we all live within our bubbles, and that critical thinking about trying to figure out. These
bubbles are so comfortable. I hate to. I don't want to leave it for a minute. Temperature's perfect.
And so I think that is part of it, is like, how do we break out of our bubbles, but how do we give people the skills to look discerningly at what they're consuming and saying, this seems like it fits a little bit too well with my narratives, so I should question this and look for other resources. But I think the real way to get to those conversations, and it's like these silly bread and butter, or not silly, but these important bread and butter conversations about like, what is it that you really want, and what are your fears? And let's talk about, like, if healthcare is a fear, it's not immigrants who are taking your healthcare away. It's the fact that we have a multi-billion or trillion-dollar industry that's making money off of your healthcare.
So much of that is in Connecticut too.
I know. What will happen to the insurance industry in the state of Connecticut?
Insurance, the pharmaceutical companies that are here.
And so, but I think there's a lot more. And you'll find when you ask people about policy. So one of the policies I talked about a lot was earned family and medical leave. So basically, the United States is only one of 2 countries in the world that doesn't have any type of system for paid family or earned family and medical leave. And but in the United States, different states have created their own systems. And so Connecticut is the only one so Massachusetts has a system, New York has a system, New Jersey has a system, Rhode Island has a system. So Connecticut's kind of one of the only ones that's in that little bubble that's left. But when you explain what paid family and medical leave is to people, it's like, it's an insurance system. You have a tiny bit of your paycheck deducted every week, and then when you need to take 12 weeks off because your child has cancer, you get paid because people. And it's something like 78% of the electorate, regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats, support that.
78%.
It's really high. And so when you come down to the policy stuff,
78% of the Senate would get a congressional amendment passed.
Exactly.
Or a constitutional amendment.
And so when you talk about like the actual policy stuff of even revamping our healthcare system, there's a lot more common ground, or going after pharmaceutical companies that have gotten people knowingly gotten people addicted to opioids and holding them accountable. There's a lot of common ground there.
So is it really just a matter of being able to identify something that people really have the best interests of not just themselves, but of their neighbors and their community being able to identify what those best interests are and engaging on those topics, or is there more? Because I try to do that, and I think a lot of people do. It's very difficult to even get through the barrier, because as soon as you say, well, let's talk about healthcare, or let's talk about immigration, or, you know, whatever it is, I think the automatic assumption is you're on the other side. I'm gonna build a wall, so I don't have to engage in this topic. I cannot imagine what it must be like knocking on doors and trying to engage random people. It's like, it's hard enough to have these conversations with, you know, people I've known for 40 years.
Strangers than with people you know for 40 years.
Yeah, oh, maybe, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think as a white person with a lot of privilege, I do think part of my responsibility is to have hard conversations and, like, when people are talking about immigrants and the caravan coming from Mexico or from Central America, taking a deep breath, not immediately kind of putting all of my fences up and being like, what is that, like, what's the core thing going on with you? And I can do that sometimes. I can't always do that. Sometimes it feels like I'm doing a lot of disservice to my friends who are immigrants or undocumented. Or it feels like, well, maybe if I can reach this person, have a conversation, and then, like, kind of dismantle some of this stuff, that seems just as important. And so it's a dance. There's no, like, right answer. I read a really interesting article the other day about ways that people were able to move people more, I guess, more progressive or more democratic. And it was based on cognitive research, and it was a psychology study, which is why I studied psychology.
Oh, okay.
But it was about how our fear response, when we heighten our fear response, people tend to vote more conservative that way.
Yeah.
And so if you just have people kind of close their eyes and reflect and, like, think about feeling safe, that moves them more democratic. And it's just, and that's... It's
really, it's amazing how much fear is used to drive certain groups of people to act certain ways, and how effective it is, considering how overt the effort really is. It's disheartening that so many people are willing to be afraid of so many things.
And it's a 24-hour news cycle that also needs to kind of engage us. And if it was just, like, lovely pleasantries for 24 hours, I'd be like, okay, that's nice. I, like, feel good, so I can turn this off and go relax. But when it's scary, it's scary, and you want to know what the next thing is, and the next thing, and the next thing. And I think that does. So, yeah. So,
when are you picking up the Govert 2020 signs?
I know. Well, all of the Govert signs are in my basement right now. So, well, that is the conversation about what does moving forward look like for me. And I am interested in running again. If there is another candidate and they are also really interested, and I think are dynamic and bring lots of interesting conversations, that will be a conversation I'll have with someone. The other part of being a candidate's hard, and it takes up a lot of time, and figuring I was fortunate to have a job as a caregiver for my grandmother that kind of afforded me some flexibility.
Okay.
But who knows where my life will be in 2 years.
Well, the campaigns are starting now, right? I mean,
I know. I was like, really,
it's
1 year.
God.
So.
Okay, so, well, I know it's 2 years away.
Right.
But what will people be voting for in Connecticut in 2020? We have a Senate seat, right? Or is that in 2022? Senator Blumenthal is coming up.
Yeah, in 2020.
I think it's 2020.
Yeah.
I'll double check that and correct it if I have to.
Right, okay.
But we'll have
the presidential ticket. So I think that'll be really interesting to see how does having, and it looks like Donald Trump is running again, and I don't think think necessarily that the Republican Party is going to challenge that and have a different candidate.
That's hard to imagine.
Yeah, at this point. And so that'll be interesting to have. So Trump was kind of on the ballot in Connecticut this year across the nation.
Yeah, the country.
He was on the ballot in this very abstract way. But when he's physically on the ballot, how does that impact the way people vote?
Right.
And does it bring out more people who are going to vote more conservative, or does it like reignite the Democratic base to a point where there's another blue wave? And
you worry about burnout at some point. The energy level's been so high for so long.
Yeah.
That can it really be sustained through another
election
cycle?
I don't. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to imagine that for me that it can be, that same energy level can be sustained. But who knows?
Right. It's like
stranger things have happened.
Fear is a powerful motivator on both sides.
Yeah,
so
it is.
For
It really
us
is.
As well, it's like.
But Connecticut specifically, the state representatives are 2 years, right? So we'll be doing this whole thing again.
And state senate is 2 years too. So
okay, so state house and state senate are 2 years.
The governorship is 4 years.
4 years, right?
Yeah.
And the Senate, the U.S. Senate is 6 years, right?
Yes.
Congress is 2 and Senate is 6, I think.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'll have to fact check all of this stuff.
Right, exactly.
I failed civics.
That's why I kept joking with people at the doors. I was like, we need civics with the Kardashians, but civics is spelled with a K.
Yeah,
no, that's how we'd get
Civics.
people civics with the Kardashians, and people might actually learn a lot more about our political
Civics with Kanye.
Yeah, that sounds scary. Well, it is happening.
Okay, I have a question from a listener that I would like to pass along to you. See if
Wonderful,
we've kind of touched on it a little bit. But Robert would like to ask, what are the constraints to creativity that a political candidate faces while crafting a campaign strategy? That is a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I tend to think of myself as kind of an out-of-the-box thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the hardest part about being creative during the campaign season was the fact that it's like you're drinking from a fire hose and you're trying to be creative at the same time. I'm like,
yeah.
And so people are saying this is how things have always been done. And the way I respond to that is like, well, I never want to do something because that's the way it's always been done.
Yeah.
But when you're drinking from a fire hose and people are like, well, this is how you do it. You're like, okay, let's do it that way. Because, so I think developing campaign strategy a year and a half in advance, which is hard because, again, you're responding to the political climate.
Who knows if they're even going to be running that far?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like, what are your resources going to be and what's, and you're just learning so much, especially as a first-time candidate, about what the electorate wants and about what are the issues on people's minds and what resonates with people. And so I think the best advice I would give anyone, and myself included, is a year and a half out really thinking about, this is what my campaign strategy is going to look like.
Yeah.
This is what my my mail that I send out might look like, because when it's October and you're door knocking 50 hours a week and you're going to events at night and you're responding to emails and doing all of that, you're just like, whatever you've done before, just do it again, because I can't. So I think that's the best. And then I think one of the things we've seen through this campaign season since 2018 or 2016 is more people bringing their full authentic selves. Mm-hmm. So in the past, the advice was a lot like, wear a black suit and talk about these issues and stay away from these things and don't talk about I think one of the things about Stacey Abrams was she has a lot of debt, and a traditional candidate wouldn't talk about their own financial hardships because we put so much negative reflection on that
it makes you susceptible to foreign governments.
Right, exactly. Or you're a failure as a human because you have some debt, but we're kind of coming as our full authentic selves. Like, everyone has debt except for the people with a lot of wealth, and
sure.
So I think,
but their wealth is built on your debt.
right.
So, yeah.
So I think, bringing our full authentic selves and developing some strategy before everything's happening are the best tools.
So I'm going to assume that you're going to run again.
Okay.
Just
thank you.
Because I'm going to. It's my show. I do what I want. What is the biggest lesson that you'll take away from this past experience that's going to help you win the next one?
Door knocking.
Start earlier.
Knock louder.
Yeah. And I think knock on more doors of people you wouldn't necessarily assume are supporters. And just, especially as the candidate.
Is that just identifying bumper stickers in the driveway as you get to the house?
The NRA sticker means, but just, well, and part of it was, voter files are public information, so we can't see how you voted, but we can see how you're registered to vote and whether or not you voted.
That's not always elections. Accurate, by the way.
Okay.
I found that out when I was turned away from the poll because I hadn't voted in the primary.
Oh, really?
At which point I said, "Oh, yes, I did."
Yeah.
So I mean, paying attention and knowing your rights when you get to the actual voting place is important.
Right. Yeah. And in the state of Connecticut, you technically don't need ID, and you can sign a provincial ballot, I think, if you don't have your ID with you. A
provisional ballot. If they can't find you on the roll,
right,
or they say you're not registered, you can request a provisional ballot that then they can go check.
Yeah.
And it will be cast afterwards. Yeah, that was another one of those things I learned for that same reason.
Good. It's all personal experience.
Yeah,
this is how personal experience is why it's so important.
Yeah.
And I think one of the conversations we have to have as a nation, you and I were talking about voter turnout in 2018. And the fact that we have elections on Tuesdays because that was the day that farmers brought in wheat into towns or something. And so we created a system of voting to be the most convenient for the most amount of people. And now it's not
for the most amount of white land holding people.
Yeah. That's actually, thank you for defining it that way. But yeah, and so how do we redefine what voting looks like in a modern age? And if we want people to engage with our democratic process, and it's a beautiful thing to see so many people go out to the polls, how do we make it easier for people to vote?
Well, I mean, some of the successful democratic countries in the world have compulsory voting, or they weekend voting, paid time off for voting, whatever, and they get 90% or higher of their voting population to come out and vote. And in this country, which is supposed to be the model of democracy, we got all excited in 2018 because 49% of the registered voters in the country turned out for a midterm, which was the highest in 100 years. 49%, 66% in Connecticut, which was better than the national average, but still 30% lower than some other countries. So we can definitely do better.
We can definitely do better. But it's become this very political or partisan conversation about expanding voting rights. And so I think, again, going back to and one of the fun things about Election Day was, regardless of which party people were in, they were like, wow, there's so many people
I stood in line for the first time. I've been voting since the mid-90s, and I've never had to stand in line.
Yeah, and people were so excited
about it. Half hour before they opened, and I was like 70-something.
Like, how did this happen? Yeah. And people, and everyone said it. They're like, I don't care how people, or like, I don't care that people are from the other party. I'm just so happy they're voting.
It really was exciting to see so many people engaging in the process.
In the process, and people. Yeah, and I talked to a lot of the Republican town committee members, and they're like, isn't this amazing? I was like, yes, and we have to remember that when we're crafting legislation to make sure that people can vote.
It was also neat to see, I mean, you were there early in the morning, and some of the other, I think I saw Norm Needleman, I think, was there at the same time. But seeing the actual reps at the polling places that early in the morning was cool too. Because it's like everybody is invested in this.
Yeah.
Regardless of party, everybody. All right. That's enough politics for one day. I have had it.
Me too.
I want to get to some rapid fire questions with some silly answers.
Okay.
Maybe.
What
is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is called Lars and the Real Girl.
Oh my God.
I shouldn't say that. I'm like, can we...
Cover the mic. That's about a sex doll.
So the reason it's I know. I was like,
so much for that 2020 campaign.
Yeah. So the reason it's my favorite movie is not because of that, but it's because of the way the community kind of comes together to support. If you've seen it, apparently.
Yeah.
So
no,
right,
nope.
Never.
My dad listens to this. Nope.
No, and so the real story behind it is that there's this man with potentially a mental illness and kind of excluded from his community in different ways, and this doll brings a community together to support him, and they pretend it's real and it's actually his wife, and there's mourning and there's community, and so that's the reason I love that movie.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
So
yep,
it's not.
Yep. I believe you. What's the best meal you've ever had?
The best meal I've ever had was, so I spent a month living in Jordan, and
that country has such a great name. Such a great name.
You're actually right. Yeah. It does have a good name, and it's also, one of the reasons I went there is because it's one of the places in the world that's accepted the most refugees.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of wanted to understand that ethos, and every morning we'd just have like pita bread and hummus, and it was just so delicious.
Yeah.
And I was working outside all day, so food always tastes better when you've been working really hard.
Yeah,
and I think
that's true.
Yeah, it was just like, I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
So that is probably my favorite meal that I've had.
That's great. One place you think everyone should visit before it's too late?
Jordan. I like that. I didn't mean to do that on purpose. And I had just told a friend, I was like, you really should visit Jordan. And I always feel a little bit elitist when I'm talking about
I just like people to call
travel.
first. That's all.
All right. He has 3 kids he has to pick up.
Yep.
But if you've ever, and I couldn't at that point reflect on why Jordan was one of my favorite places I've traveled, but Petra's in Jordan, and it is just the most magical place I've ever been.
Okay.
And it's a city carved out of stone with more accuracy than like modern architects can figure out how to do with. And they're like, we would have to use lasers to create lines and corners this.
Wow. All right, that's a Google search later.
Yeah,
okay.
And Jordan's also fun because you can go to the Red Sea, which is like this beautiful ocean. You can go to the Dead Sea. You can go to the desert. You can go to the forest. All within like a 4-hour drive of each other. So it's kind of,
Did you go into the Dead Sea at all?
I did go into the Dead Sea.
Is it really as buoyant as...
It is. Yeah. It's freaky.
Yeah.
Like, the hardest part for me was like, don't touch your eyes, because as soon as it's so salty, you're just... Like you could,
I can imagine.
Yeah, so just reminding myself not to touch my eyes with really salty hands.
That's good advice everywhere. Do you have a big pet peeve?
Do I have a big pet peeve? I do not.
No?
I don't think so. I'm pretty easygoing.
All right.
So, do you have a big pet peeve?
I have lots of them.
Really?
Yeah. Like when people turn my questions back on me.
I did it. I'm trying to think of what really like grinds me the wrong way.
No, that's good if you don't. I mean, yeah.
Like growing up overseas and then being a Peace Corps volunteer, you just learn to go with the flow with everything, and so
I one of mine is like when people refuse to admit that they're creative, like when people just give up being able to think outside of the box on something.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy.
Like there are other ways.
And I would like to hear your best campaign story, like a conversation you had while knocking on a door, something that happened during or after your campaign that just really stuck with you and has had an impact?
Yeah. So the most impactful conversations I had, I'm trying to think if I had any really funny campaign stories. I have really funny Peace Corps stories, but I think for the campaign, the thing that just really went down to my core was just how honest people were willing to be with a stranger at their door. There was so many times where I was like, wow, that person just disclosed that their daughter had to move to a different town because she had a stalker, or like real things, or people would burst in. And actually, there was a lot of times that I would be at a door crying with someone who was crying because they were sharing something that had gone on in their lives that just shouldn't have gone that way, because there are systems we can put in place. And a lot of it's around healthcare. Yeah. And just, and then a lot of conversations about the opioid epidemic.
I'll bet. Yeah.
And one of them I specifically remember is actually someone who lives near me, a neighbor, and it was like the last door, and I was really exhausted, and I knocked on the door, and I was talking to the husband originally, and the woman came down and talked about, and the husband was the person I was there to really see, and she came down and she was like, I need to talk to you about the opioid crisis. You have to do something about the opioid crisis. And I worked at an inpatient treatment facility for people in recovery. So I was like, I'm with you. And she's like, my son died a week ago. And then his girlfriend died a week after that. So my grandchild lost. Opiates? Yeah. So 2 overdoses in her life within a week. And her grandchild lost both parents. And literally both of us were crying. And it's just, yeah. And just how, and in the state of Connecticut, you're more likely to die from an opioid overdose than in a car accident. And there's so much shame and stigma.
Holy cow.
Yeah. But we don't talk about it because we see drug addiction and substance use disorders as a personal failure, as a family failure, rather than a societal failure or the actual diseases that they are. Right. So. So those were
I thought that was going to be a fun story.
I'm sorry. I was trying to think of something funny that happened.
God, that's horrible.
I did knock on a stranger's door, then asked them immediately to use the bathroom. Like, I'm a Democrat. And I was like, okay, can I use your bathroom?
Oh, boy.
There was some of that.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I won him because Jordan's my favorite place to visit.
Yeah, right. Okay. So I like to ask everybody for a recommendation. Just something that you've experienced maybe recently that you really want to encourage other people to try. It could be from anything.
Yeah. So one of the life experiences I have also had.
This isn't Lars and the Real Girl again.
No, it's not. But I'm like, right. I'm like, well, we're non-judgmental. But so one of the things I've been able to do is attend some births, and I think
I've been to a few of those.
Yeah, and I think everyone should attend a birth and. Just
ask first,
yeah. Make sure they're okay with it, because that's the most important thing. But just, it's this magical experience between like realms of existence almost. And again, healthcare. Yeah. So it's one of those things where I'm like, wow, having a strong healthcare system is so important, and a healthcare system that's responsive to actual human needs.
The mortality rate for infants in this country has risen over the last few years, hasn't it?
Yeah. And
that's amazing to me.
And for Black women,
be getting worse.
I know. It's right, with all of the advances we're having, and the fact that Black women are not believed a lot in medical situations. And Serena Williams almost died after childbirth.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, and so how do we have a healthcare system that's responsive to all of the people?
Yeah.
And then because I talk about paid family and medical leave afterwards, I think after you've witnessed a birth, you can understand why important it is that people have the time to recover from that, because it's something like 1 in 4 women are back to work within 2 weeks after giving birth.
Way too soon.
Yeah. It's like basically it's a major surgery that your body naturally does, but it takes your body years to recover.
Yeah.
And so the fact that
it really is an amazing thing to be there to witness, though. Like, just, yeah. I got a whole new appreciation for my wife after those 2 experiences. Yeah. But definitely ask first. It'd be awkward to just walk into the delivery room and be like, hey, I'm just here to kind of check out the action.
I want a new life experience.
Teresa said I could come.
After I watch Flyers in the Real Girl.
All right. How are you feeling right now?
Good, great.
Yeah?
Everything's, I feel very blessed always. So
okay. That's awesome. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jordan.
Right.
A big thank you once again to Theresa Govert for coming on the pod and for being so willing to talk about a campaign that was still really fresh at the time that we recorded. If you're not already subscribed to the pod, I hope that you'll do that with whatever podcast service you use. And if that service allows ratings and reviews, I hope you'll leave one so I can read them soon. 2019 looks to be a big year, not only in politics, but for Table to Stage as well. So stay tuned for some changes in format and hopefully in the reach of the pod. Let's hit 2019 running, and as always, keep creating.